already. I will introduce myself just at the end, but first let me introduce my co-moderator. His name is Giles Omezi, just next to me. Giles is an architect, based before in London, in Lagos after that, the head of Strada DB. So Giles will be my co-moderator. Let me introduce you as well to Dr. Enotie Ogbebor from National Council of Arts and Culture. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Next, to the right of Evie, you can find Dr. Oluwatoyin Z from Ibadan University. Thank you for joining us. To the right of Dr. Oluwatoyin, you're going to find Enotie Ogbebor, who's an artist and also part of the trustee of the Legacy Restoration Trust. Last but not least, Ṣọlá from the Institute of African Studies in Ibadan, where he's a professor. He's a specialist of literature and music in Nigeria. Thank you, Prof, for joining us. My name is Vincent Hiribarren. I'm a historian. I'm also the director of the French Research Institute in Nigeria, hosted by the Institute of African Studies in Ibadan. So nice to meet you, all of you. Thank you for joining us. So thank you for coming to this debate, and I think you're all aware of what's going on here, and I think that there's no need for more introductions. And I think we just wanted to start maybe to remind you of what the French position was about this whole situation about restitution. In a few words only, I don't need to dwell on this, but you might remember that 4 years ago the French President, Emmanuel Macron, gave a speech at the University of Ouagadougou where he talked about the necessity for European countries to think about the restitution of African cultural heritage. Restitution was a word that he used. He asked two academics, one of them is a Senegalese economist, and another one is a French academic working in Germany, to write a report, which they did, and which they published a year later, published in French and English if you're interested. This report made some recommendations for European countries, including France, to restitute, to give back, basically, cultural heritage stolen from Africa. So, just with this reminder, I guess, I wanted to start this whole conversation, and with Giles and I will moderate this whole roundtable. We will have short blocks of 15-20 minutes. After that, we'll ask questions from the audience. And remember, we ask questions, try to keep them short, no more than 2-3 minutes, otherwise we'll have time to finish this debate. Thank you. Giles, do you want to start? Would you like to start? Yes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this discussion roundtable. Thinking about restitution of African art, which is quite topical at the moment, we have a series of issues that we've centered these discussions around. We have a very interesting panel here. And I'd like to start by talking about restitution as a word, as a process. And I'd like my panelists to engage us and the audience on what they think, what their thoughts are about restitution as we know today. So I'm going to ask first Oluwatoyin to talk about restitution, just a word, from your understanding.
Okay, thank you for having me here. I'll just quickly make a simple correction. It's Ajayi Crowder University. Well, to me, in simple terms, restitution means return. Just put back in place the way things was. And nothing other than that, in simple terms.
Okay. Thank you for that very brief explanation. Of course, we're looking at the origin of the word and what it means. But how do you see this process working within the context of removed objects? How they're removed, either through violent process or through acquisition, etc. So, what does restitution mean today?
Okay, when it's put within context, then it makes more sense. But to everyone sitting in the house, as in for those listening even online, restitution simply means return. And when it comes to the context of looted objects or objects that were taken away from their original place of origin, it means much more. And if we have to break that down, it means putting those objects back into the context with which they were known, with which they were used, and within the context of history of the people. So you would basically say, taking things back and placing them the way they were. But then the question will be, culture in itself is not static. So, but first is a start. Acknowledging that this is not yours, returning these things to their place of origin or to the places where they're known and where they can be used for what they were designed for.
Thank you very much, Oluwatoyin. I'll ask Enotie to develop this further. Oluwatoyin talked about these artifacts being put back and hints at the utility aspect of these objects. Can you help us understand how, in our contemporary condition, we can start to put these objects back? Will they revert to their former uses? What will the objects be on return?
Thank you. For cultural restitution of the artifacts, it's important that we understand that these objects, for their original purposes, were for religious, historical, and memory keeping, and some were for decorative, and some were utilitarian. So, in taking them away from Africa, or from any other indigenous peoples around the world, you decontextualize these items, because you take them from their original purpose, and you keep them in glass cases and exhibit them as objects. You have to understand that in the case of the Benin artifacts, for instance, the plaques were made to keep history, they were made as our record-keeping materials. And when you look at this, look at a plaque, it tells you the story about maybe 15th century king. And you know, our stories in Africa are always embedded with songs, they're embedded with lots of memories. So it means that by looking at the plaque, you could actually hear a story, you could hear music, you could hear the songs that follow. So it's a lot when we talk about restitution. These items need to be brought back so that they can be contextualized to their original purpose. This is the way people can engage with these objects and also find out who they really are. Because the narrative that there was no civilization before the intervention of colonialism is something that these objects are debunking on a daily basis and their mere existence. So, in this context, it's important that they are reunited with the people, so that the people can discover their stories, their history, their culture, their traditions, and also fill the gap and change the mentality. Because if you know where you're coming from, it's easier to know where you are and where you're headed.
Thank you very much, Enotie. I'm going to ask Dr. Ṣọlá to help develop these themes that we're seeing emerging. Talks about returning them to their original purpose. Oluwatoyin talked about culture not being static. I'm interested in how you think about bringing an object, a historical object, back, say 100 years later, into a contemporary context and a different culture, and how, as Enotie suggests, this object can be put back to the original purpose. And I'm asking you because of your oral history and background. So let's understand your thoughts, please.
Let's start with his name. I'm told the full expression of it will be Enotie Ogbebor, right?
Enotie Ogbebor.
Now, the visual artist may freeze that in time. When you remove it from here, what happens therefore is you rob it of the interaction with the community of that day. And so also with all of these objects, as we do know. And it's particularly painful because the Benin dimension, and I explain why. This is the same civilization that had very healthy relationship with Portugal as far back as the 15th century. This was a city where there would be light all over, there would be light, not the electricity that we know, as this wasn't anywhere then anyway, all night, because it had so developed its environment, integrated it with, the commodity that it had so much, which was the palm oil, right? And wicks and all that would line large cities, described in manners that today would still be compared to. So when we have a civilization of that nature, so much in our medical information, so much in history, so much in genealogy, so much in ontology of this place and the people around there are gone. You understand what we're saying? So it does seem to me that, like the experts in the field are saying, therefore, that return to the original state, they are not unmindful that there has been a time interval. But they're saying, like I think Oluwatoyin was saying to me yesterday, restitution would include the sense of accommodating a support system that will factor in that inclusion of both the knowledge systems and the people, so that it can become more inclusive. So I think these are the new dimensions that this may take.
Thank you, Dr. Ṣọlá. I'm going to pass this last one on to you. And I think the word that comes to mind for me is absence. In the process of removal, there seems to be a void. Would you agree that this void, and no, actually let me rephrase that. Would you say that this void, the impact of this void is so much that the cultural evolution perhaps is not where it should be? I know it's a tricky one, because of course culture evolves. But I think what I'd like to see is the objects themselves, that removal, that absence. What has it done to our culture in Benin today?
I understand your question. The Benin will say, if you pick a child to play with, but you still have to return the child to its mother. The Benin's, as far as 1940, have been agitating for the return of their works. Yes. I remember I was told a story when a private individual bought some of the artworks from the British and brought them to the palace of the Oba of Benin and handed them over to His Royal Majesty Omonoba Akenzwa of blessed memory in 1940. To the amazement of all, Oba Akenzwa stood up and danced and sang, Esagele Mayo, Emayo, Sagele Mayo, Uti Beni, Sagele Mayo, Emayo, Sagele Mayo, Uti Beni, Sagele Mayo, Emayo, Sagele Mayo. Because I'm just explaining the absence. Only to Oba Akenzwa. It is only to him. He was the only one that knew the meaning of Isagolo Mani, Sagele Mani. And then Uti Beni. I don't think time will permit me to talk. Yes, there was a chief who was turning himself to a white elephant and causing obstruction in the land and disturbances until he was eliminated by a man called Uti. So for Akenzwa to sing that song, it was victory. Even though the items were bought by a private individual, but the fact that he was setting his eyes on the artifacts that were removed, that we have been feeling the absence. So he was of great joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. That's a very wonderful end to this session. Before we go any further, just some ground rules. For each of these groups, we're going to have questions which we'll throw out to the audience. So we will throw 2 questions out. Speak for 2 minutes, get to the point, so it doesn't drag it, because we don't have a lot of time. Does anyone in the audience have a question about these issues we've discussed about restitution? Anyone? Okay. Can someone give me the microphone? Please, do you want to direct a question to anyone, or you want any of the panelists to take it?
Okay. I think, I don't know what most of these arts signifies, because they were taken long time ago. I think before they were taken, this art signifies some stories, some histories, some heritages. It was an object of heritage before it was taken. So now, the French wants to make intention of returning it. And when these subjects were taken long time ago, it represented history. Now you are returning it. If you want to return it without making provisions on how this object can be integrated back to the society with its history and the story, I think it won't. My question would be, what efforts are the French trying to make sure they make provisions for the histories of this object to be integrated to the society?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me take one more question, and then I'll throw both questions to the panel. Gentleman in the black suit.
My name is Jonathan Sogbesan. Like Mommy said to us earlier on, the Benin Kingdom have been active for the return of these items since the 1940s. I've been growing up listening to stories about these items. Now, my major worry is, how are we very sure that they are ready to return the original items they took from us? That these are not duplicated or rebranded or repeated items that they are trying to return to us. Thank you.
As mentioned at the start, the French president gave a speech 4 years ago in Ouagadougou and asked commission a report to be written for him a year later. He's organizing as well a summit, a new summit, Africa-France summit in Montpellier, which is a southern French town, in July, where he wants us to discuss, all this together. So all the recordings being done today, as you can tell, being recorded, will be used as well to feed this form of conversation here. That's the part of the dialogue and the conversation. In terms of the things being done, in the last few years, the last 20 years, the French have restituted human remains, have recently as well, or 10 years ago, given back art to South Korea under President Sarkozy, and recently as well art to Senegal and the Republic of Benin. So things are moving, as you can tell, intellectually and legally as well, so that's the steps being taken at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Sorry? Yeah? Yes. Sorry.
Just to add to that, because your question is actually broad, and he's answered the French one. This will also... Oh, okay, cool. Sorry. So, one thing I picked from your question is a question of significance. Like, it's coming, and how do we reinsert it into the community? Okay, and that wouldn't be the French work, that's my work and your work. And why do I say so? It's just like your identity. When you talked about yourself and you introduced yourself, I didn't come to you to say you're a boy or you're a man. You stood up and said, my name is isn't it? Because you know yourself. So it is our work to go back to history, to go back to our communities and awareness. I don't know when you started, I heard something like, these things, they're talking about these things. Because all of a sudden they become objects, they become things. These permit me to say, I don't want to get emotional, but these are not just things. These are global identity materials, and I'll break it down. First, it tells me of an Edo person. So it's your identity, it's your history, it's your way of life. We are not written, we don't write. Africans don't write. We're visual, oral people, and that's how we keep our history. So all those plaques, the heads, the mask, the tusk, all those things tells of an event. So they documented all our events. Over time, we've been told we don't have history, but now we know because of these artifacts that we have history. But the thing is, your home, my home, are museums, for instance. There's some things you've seen with your mom, spoons, plates, and she'll sit you down and tell you the story of how these pots were used in those days. And then if you needed to see a more sophisticated type of those days, you might visit a chief's house. And then if you needed to see a higher level of museum, I go to the Oba's palace. Because there he shows me the wealth of the people. So they're not just things, but there's work for me and you to be able to retell the stories to our children. And that stories are meant to be enacted because these things are evident that me and you were from civilized world.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I'd like to just throw this integration question to Enotie, because of course your involvement with the new museum, etc. Thinking about integration of these objects back into our society, but also this idea of these objects being documents, because you talked about it, that the plaque isn't just an object, it's not just a relief. You talked about music, stories, there's a sort of living aspect to this piece of metal. So I think, I'd like you to expand on that a bit before we then move on to the second question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by giving you an analogy. So you can imagine Europe and the history of Europe. So just imagine if the works of Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Mozart, Plato, Shakespeare, if they were removed from Europe for the last 130 years, do you think Europe will have a civilization at this level? And so, that's what the removal of objects signify. Because, how does it signify music? I told you, if you're looking at the plaque of Oslo, coming from the 14th century, there are songs which were composed at that time that tell stories. So just looking at that plaque, you begin to think about Oslo. And then you begin to talk about the history of Oslo. So from a plaque, you will spend the next 1 week talking about the history of Oslo. And also singing the songs coming from the 14th century. So it's a storage of memory. Now to integrate them into society, there's been an effort by the Edo State government in conjunction with the major stakeholders, like the National Commission for Museum and Monuments, and the Royal Palace of Benin, Montpellier, to put up a new museum called Edo Museum of West African Arts. This museum is being designed by Sir David Ajay in conjunction with other Nigerian architects and artists. This museum is not going to be typical of the Western type museum, which are institutions which showcase objects they've collected from all over the world to show off their conquest or their colonial power or their imperial power. this museum that is being conceptualized to be built here is a museum that's going to be living. It's a museum that seeks to contextualize these objects, to display them the way in which they were originally displayed, so that when our people, and when people from all over the world come through this museum, they get a very deep sense of who we are. They get a deep sense of how we lived, a deep sense of our achievements. And so our people will be the biggest beneficiaries. Because when they know who they are, when they see what we achieved 800 years ago, without the kind of technologies which are available now, then you have to ask yourself, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing? So this museum is not just going to be a place that will warehouse objects from the past. It's a museum that will also have an area for contemporary modern works, because till tomorrow, bronzes are being produced at Igun Street. Artists are working 24 hours all over Nigeria, all over Africa, all over West Africa. And so, side by side, these works will be showcased. And this museum will also develop spaces for community interaction, so that the young, old, poor, the rich, everybody can have access to these spaces for performance, for drama, for theater, for productions. And so we hope that with this open interaction, and the museum is going to be a part of a larger urban development to create a culture center, a culture quarter. So that from the museum, which is going to be opposite the Oba Palace, you have the Oba Palace, you have Igun Street, you have the National Museum in King Square, you have the moat and the ancient walls behind the court of the High Court. And so, with all this within a quarter, it's easy for you to just go by foot and navigate all these entire spaces. And so with this, you have this interaction which will reveal to our people who we are.
Thank you very much, Enotie. I hope that's clear to everyone as to what the intentions are. And I think Enotie has expanded quite greatly on ideas of what the museum will be or can be. But I want to explore the thinking about restitution and the objects coming back. And I think we're touching on a very common theme, which is when these objects come back, the integration. Enotie has talked about one, i.e. an institutionalized framework where they will be gazed upon. I think locally, what are our own ideas on how they come back into the community? Oluwatoyin was talking about the museum being in the house, where everyone's home is a museum. And I think even traditionally in Benin, some of these artifacts record history and time of families. Can we explore this thinking locally of how we, as Nigerians, are going to deal with these objects coming back? Are they going to be sitting not in the museum? Are they going to go into people's houses, in the places of worship? You know, I'd like you guys to explore this for me. If you please, I think it would be great if you could take that one first.
There is a man by name William Sag, who was keeper at Mankind Museum, London. He wrote a book entitled The Sack That Never Was. But as a rejoinder, then the DG of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments fired back in his own reply and said, the sack that was. We don't have to shy away from it, because William said what we call stolen objects by the British Army were, some of them were actually sold to the British government. Only few were brought by the British Army. And he himself, deep down in his heart, knew he was lying. Yes. If we are talking of restitution, bringing these things back, I have the right to my own opinion, though my opinion may not be right, but I'm standing like that. To me, I believe in repatriation and restitution. not just restitution. Bring them back and pay for them, pay for the damage, for the loss, for the absence. Yeah, since 1897. Yes, so both reparation and restitution, I stand for that. If we are bringing them back, now, according to Enotie, we are going to have a new museum. Yes, a Museum of West African Arts. The British government, all these years, have been providing security for those items. My take on that is, let them bring these artifacts. Let them provide security, iron plant security for them, just as they have been doing for their own. Yes, build the museum, put them there, then pay restitution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much again. Dr. Ṣọlá.
Yeah, thanks. Just deepen that a little bit. I do feel that in bringing this item back from the speaking as an educationist now, and I was saying to my brother Enotie that we in the educational sector would also like to jump in there because looking at how rich these artifacts are, as teachers, we feel the absence of the integration of the museum in our lives. It seems to me that the Nigerian curriculum really needs to be worked on a little more. And so when, for instance, Dr. Oluwatoyin says to you that there must be inclusion, I think part of what you meant was the inclusion of so that the owners, the people, can be part understanding agencies. So it will not just be scholars and experts like Enotie, herself, and you, cheating the rest of us, okay, in these conversations of expertise. The next generation should know it. The educational situation when these things were taken away was interactive, was informal. Now it is formal. So part of that will be put it in the curriculum and let us beg the Muslims and the Christians. May I say this 3 times in the manner of ritual. Let us beg the Christians and the Muslims, and let us beg the Muslims and the Christians. Let us remind them that daily practices are what we call ritual. Daily practices are what we call ritual. So every human being, a human being that is not ritualized is not a human being. You cannot create society without ritual. So we must understand the different context of, so if we do not understand how things were then, well, because we were defeated people by a superior army, when people come to your land and they make life difficult for about 400 years, as happened in the transatlantic slavery, people lose their memory, and a few people who have been saved begin to blame their ancestry, their past. We remind people, it is the same ritualistic and dark and occultic Shintoists from Japan and China that will make the microphone with which you are condemning ritual. Please, let us understand that we can be part of the body of Christ and see a piece of work of art and understand it as a work of art. You don't have to worship it. And also to my brothers Christians and Muslims too. You can see a piece of work because Islamic world has some of the greatest arts we do have. You don't have to worship it. We do know there's no other God but Allah, and Prophet Muhammad is expressing that. However, in spite of your belief, you have another duty. You can't quarrel with somebody who believes in that. We are not requesting, we are demanding. The indigenous people of Africa are saying to Christians and Muslims, we appreciate you. There will be no continent for you to survive in. If you are going to remove us from the very context of our own essence and our own spiritual being, it would happen. You couldn't do it then, and it is too late now. There's the internet. It is too late. People are finding spirituality in all kinds of ways. Your relationship with me is far as law and order are concerned, not about my spirituality. We are citizens only on the basis of law and order. So I think we got integrated. So that is why you do not, therefore, as an educationist, block how children will have access in the curriculum. Because we block these things. We make it impossible, for instance, right now, the Nigerian child does not have secular means of expressing songs in order to have inter-Nigerian conversation. All nursery schools is either you are singing a song that is Islamic or Christian. You divide the children from childhood. The only interactive space that allows you, that recognizes plurality, is the African spirituality. Not necessarily as worship, but as an intellectual engagement. The Benin worships will not tell you, do not play with another person. Ogun worship will not say, don't go and meet Oya. You don't have to worship, but take the intellectual content of its own acknowledgement of diversity.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to take this idea of detoxifying the word ritual to Oluwatoyin. Because I think you mentioned it earlier in the conversation how this attitude prevents our interaction with artifacts in museum spaces because they're seen in a negative light as fetish, etc. Can you please develop this for us further? I think it's an important point in terms of how we integrate back.
Okay, first and foremost, integrating will also mean improving professions and professionals within the museum sector. Because as it is now, we have institutions who do museum studies and heritage studies and all, but it's not enough to just have the theories. It's having the practical hands-on work. And when it comes to language of interpretation, they have to be an inclusive kind of language. So I will share an experience. I went to a museum, and from the door, it was a holster. What do I need? I get to the door, and I'm told, don't bring in your camera, yeah? Because, and then I ask why. I said, because actually your pictures might bring thieves. And I'm like, okay, cool. So you give them your camera, and then you get in, and the interpretation staff is saying, look at this. You know, you're telling me how to look. Look at this. It is a man. And that is what they do in Benin. They do this. You know, and then you say, look at that drum. It is used by social group. It's rituals for ritual stuff. You first feel okay. And then the person say, but a lot of mothers don't let us show this to their children because it's rituals. And you don't use such terms because such terms are demeaning, they are scary, they continue to propagate the narrative of primitivism that has always been used to define us. So, how about putting the narrative this way? This is an object used for traditional worship, for respecting traditional beliefs by the indigenous people. Because before I sit here, I need to really thank my forefathers, who are the owners of the land, who plowed the same land and made it habitable for me. The Benin people here will know how they will worship them or pay homage to them. So for me to come into the land, normally when you get to the city gate, you them for the land. And you pray that the city be fruitful for you. And then you enter that city. And when you enter the city, the first person you go to see might be the chief or the custodian of that city. And then maybe if I'm opportune to see the Oba or the chiefs or whatever, they say, you're welcome. These are the rules of the city. And then I start to leave. So we need to change the narrative, the terminologies within our existing museums. So I'm so pleased that NCMM is in partnership with this. And I know in here they're represented. And I'm happy with the trainings that are going on. I'm only hoping that they will be used within the museum space to make the museum space a space of incontestable identity. So I could come into the museum and feel I have a connection to these objects by saying they are global objects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oluwatoyin. That's really great. I'd like to take 2 more questions around these themes. Again, keep it short. So the gentleman in yellow, I can see. The chap at the back.
Thank you. May I remove my mask? My name is Ehi Igile. I'm the president of the Benin Cultural Heritage Center. We are promoting the culture of the Beninese. I have 2 points to make. No question. I want to support the 2 last speakers. The problem we have is Christianity and Islam. They brought this foreign religion on us, and they changed our minds. They took our minds. So when you are returning our great artifacts, like treasures, our people will reject them and say, idolatry items. That's what the average Benin man would say. This is an idol, I don't want it. Our homes that were filled with all these arts, they are empty now. All you have is a picture of a white man called Jesus. That's all. So we need to educate our people that these people really ruined us with these 2 religions, Islam and Christianity. Ruined us. They underdeveloped us. And we must teach our children the truth. And when you are bringing these artifacts, they should not just be in the museum. We should encourage our people to admire these things. Even the average Benin man doesn't have the picture of his father in the living room anymore. There are pictures of Jesus, Joseph, very few of you. Very few of you. So it's a fact, please. The second point I want to make is that the Benin Cultural Heritage Center is already building a Benin Heritage Village with a museum. We have a museum we're already building there too. So we will also support the retribution or repatriation of these items. Then my sister also made a point. Britain, European museums have been making money with our artifacts, billions of dollars. So that money, part of the money should be returned to us because it was a great damage done to the community. You did a great damage, you destroyed our minds, you took our minds. Would you believe an average Benin man is bearing a European name? It's impossible. I used to bear a European name, but in 1963 when I was in England, I found out no English boy bore an African name. So I had to go to the court to change my name to Hiribarren. And I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of their name. So please, I admire you all talking to us. Please, we must imbibe the African culture and the African religion. Our religion is number 1 in this aspect because Christianity tells you, my family insignia called Uhure is an idolatry object. Why he brings a cross made of wood too to me and I say that's Jesus, that's God's own. That's false. That's false. We must teach our people and teach our children. So from today on, please be an African name, be a Benin name. Put these arts in your homes, not just museum. There were 50 American visitors that came, and I took them to the palace. They were so impressed. But when they were going, after the dinner we had, they were not happy at all, African Americans. So I said, why are you not happy? They said, apart from my place, the palace, and the all homes they went, no arts. Look at this hall, no arts. This is the best hotel in Benin. We should have Benin arts all over, even the chairs. Should be Benin carvings and bronze. You should be sitting on it. So we are wrongly, our minds have been wrongly, captured. So we have to recapture the African mind.
Good afternoon. My name is Manas Mbolaho. I have two questions. The first question goes to my sister from the Benin Council, Arts and Cultural Councils. Are there documentations of the stolen artifacts that have been exploited from the Benin Kingdom by the French government? And then number two, number two question goes to the French representative. Are there documentations? Over the years, we understand that some of these arts have been auctioned to private individuals. Are there documentations when you want to talk about restitution, getting those arts from those people, those private people who have been auctioned to, it has been auctioned to? Thank you very much.
I will answer that question. Yeah, thank you for the question. In terms of auctioning stolen art, this is a process which took place after the looting of Benin, which did happen exactly the same process when the French invaded different parts of Africa. The whole auctioning system was very much more widespread among British troops than it was among French ones. But it doesn't mean that private collections in France still don't contain such art. So it doesn't mean there wasn't any form of circulation of such art that anyone mentioned here. So it's possible to trace back some of it to some French collectioners, but here we're talking about private collections. And I guess it's always very hard to know what's going on in private collections, since by definition they're private. So the problem is that here we can trace it back to certain people, certain individuals, but unfortunately it's impossible to go back to the origin point where basically when things were actually stolen. So quite often we lose this historical trace. That's the clue. The clue is missing basically. But that's the job of historians, and I guess it's my job, so that's what I can do. You asked also the first question, am I right? Maybe I misunderstood it. Sorry, that's why. Sorry.
And thank you, our brother. National Council for Arts and Culture, which is a parastatal under the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture, is the only federal agency charged with the statutory functions of promoting, preserving, and propagating Nigeria's rich cultural heritage. Yes, we have documentation of stolen items. Even at the local level, the Institute for Benin Studies has gone far in documenting every item that was stolen from Benin. If we have not been documented, or if it wasn't documented at all, the list of those items taken away from Nigeria, how did we know the head of Queen Lydia was not with us? Traditionally, we have the Uwong in Benin. They are the chroniclers, the forerunners, the recorders of events traditionally and historically in Benin. We still have the members at the Palace of the Oba of Benin. When Nigeria was preparing for the Festival of Arts and Culture, which held in 1977, that is FESTAC, the only image that Nigerians felt would be more appropriate for the festival was the image of the head of Queen Lydia, the mask that is now found everywhere. If you know Enotie Ogbebor very well, you know how he has gone far in propagating that. Now, the British government that stole the item from us, the Nigerian government requested for the release of the same object. Instead of returning it to us, they demanded for $1 million British pounds sterling. 2 million. No, 2 million. Just to loan it to us, not to release it to us. Yes. Agreement was made. But maybe on a second thought, they said, if we return this thing to the owners, after use, they won't return it because they are the owners. Then they refused to return the item. That was what brought about as the assemblage of artists. Come and try your hands in replicating this. And the man that succeeded or that was the winner of the competition for replicating the head of Queen Idia is Chief Joseph Alufa Igbinovia. His work stood out, and he's a Benin man. That was how the Nigerian government was able to get that item. So we produced those items, and we are still producing them. So we have records. We have records of all these items that were taken. And in 1992, when the International Society for Benin Studies held a conference, Omonoba Ediawa was the special guest of honor who declared it open. Then the list of stolen items were presented at the University of Benin. Dr. Sagioba Yuwana and one Jemi Alade, they came out with their team agitating for the return. Since then, the whole thing has caught fire. You must return our artifacts. Yes, not going back. And I don't think when they come back, we will reject them. We are not rejecting them. We will cherish them. We will cherish them. Let us separate religion from culture. Yes, let us separate religion from history. Even Jesus Christ, if they say Jesus Christ of Nazareth, he had a base. So the Benin, we have a base. Without this land, without our culture, we are nowhere. So we want them, we will cherish them. We will not regard them as fetish objects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we'll move on to we'll take questions after the next. Now I want to think of these pieces and these cultural items coming back. How within, say, the museum space, we start to think of museum operating in such a way that it brings these objects back into our society in a different way. So we have to think about, say, programming. We have to think of value, which I think we're touching on more different aspects here. So I'd like to explore that. I want Oluwatoyin to start. Your thoughts on that?
Okay, if I understand the question very well, is how our museums will help in integrating this object. Okay, first and foremost, museums have different roles they play, and one of it is museum and education. So when we're talking about museum and education, we'll now be looking at teaching, research, and community service. Because a museum is as good as a university. You get what I mean? So for teaching, it means, if you look at the museum, before I go further, I know a curator is here in our midst, and he can attest to that. 95% of their audience are school children. So it's catch them young. And the idea is, if we continue to groom these ones, hopefully, very soon, we'll have a generation of museum visitors. Nigerians are not known to visit museums. So if I ask him how many of us have been to the museums, even though we live in Benin is like the last place you want to go. So, first is museum taking their place as a university, and one doing that job, museum and education. So education will be first from toddler or from childhood to the elderly. So it's including everyone. So we could have a night in the museum where we have someone like Evie come sit and tell folklore to these children, but in the museum space. Yeah? So that's one. Another thing the museum does is museum and audience development. Your audience are not just elitist. Museums are built and have the run-ins or parameters of becoming elitist, excluding those they need to include. So before you know it, you think, oh, museum is for the educated, elitist, rich. You know, they have time to go anywhere, people. But no, museum is for everyday persons, because leisure is part of what you need in life. And leisure is art, and art is life. So that's another. Museum needs to know how to develop these audiences, go into the communities, see how to take museum away from the museum space. So the museum professionals going in to the different, locality and seeing what is useful within that locality and bringing maybe an object from the museum. It could be a copy, but make them sing, make them talk, make them so you're facilitating knowledge and research, because then new data will start to emerge. And then lastly is community, in the teaching line then will be community development. So you have teaching, research and community service. So audience development comes in, and then you now have making sure the museum is an interactive space. So the museum is not just a space for tangible objects, but is a space to reenact intangibility to sustain the tangible. The tangible objects are dead anyway, without the intangible. She just sang here. She took the steps. She started to dance. He started to support the song. And I felt bad I couldn't open my mouth and sing with them. I felt jealous. That is what the museum should do. So as soon as I get into Benin or anywhere, the first place I want to go to is the museum. And the museum tells me, when I get to Benin, I should say, call, and expect them to greet me back in a certain way. And then when they start speaking, I say, I don't know beyond this, because I've seen it in the museum that this is the way they greet, or things like that. And then lastly, so as to be relevant, a museum space should be engaging of digital interaction. So that way, and I know my museum professionals will start to say, oh, money, hey, start from where you are. Your WhatsApp is something. Your Twitter page, your Twitter handle is something. Your Instagram handle is something. You take a picture today and just send it. I take a picture of the India mask and I just send it out. And every child is saying, I know that. My mom told me is this. Someone will say, I know about Fest at 7 to 7. And then everyone will start sharing their story. So if the museum starts taking place in doing this few out of the so many, we'll then see the museum as a proper university, as a space where curriculums can be designed and redesigned. Curriculums are not meant to be static. We're still working with curriculums of 1973. Hey, education and learning is moved on. So we need to involve both the formal and support it with the informal. In Africa, we learn informally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oluwatoyin, again, for a great contribution. I like this idea of a formative space. And I like the idea of, at the heart of Benin culture, is performance, dance, music, singing. This is for Enotie, because we've talked about somehow, spatially, this coming into the museum. And I think in my mind, I have this museum not just being a sterile, Eurocentric type space, but one where people can come. They can dance, they can sing, not just once a year, twice a year, but on a regular basis. I'm imagining that. Can you help us develop those thoughts? Because I know performance is something you're strong on in your art production. Thank you.
Thank you very much. as I was listening to Dr. Oluwatoyin, it was very clear that aspirations and ideas of an ideal museum are thoughts and ideas that we have encapsulated into the design of EMOA and more. You have to understand that the Legacy Restoration Trust is an independent trust that has been set up by the district government in conjunction with other stakeholders like the Palace, the NCMN, to serve as a structure to raise the funds, to build a museum, and to manage it and perpetuate it. So this museum is going to be managed under an independent trust. So this precludes the interference by government or by individuals or by institutions. Because an independent trust is protected by the Constitution. And so this museum has been conceptualized, basically, the EMOA Museum, it's been conceptualized basically to bring people into the space and live with an experience of who we are as Edos, who we are as Nigerians, who we are as West Africans, and with other curatorial activities, who we are as human beings. Because I also imagine that the contemporary space that will be included in this museum will also be used to show contemporary art that's being produced today. So you come into this space and you can experience works that were made 800 years ago in Benin, and also experience works that were made yesterday. So when you see the, and then, you know, part of the concept of the museum is using a lot of digital, computer-generated imagery, artificial intelligence, to also tell our stories. As you know, because of the leapfrogging into mobile devices, we all tend to be very digital, and our children have become even more so. I mean, I started by dialing like this on the telephone, and now I'm pressing just the glass plate, and everything comes to me. And so our children are purely digital, and so if you're bringing them to a space, you want to invite them into a space, they should be able to also interact with these objects in a digital manner. So you're coming to the museum and hearing a voice, welcome to the Kingdom of Benin. You know, so it becomes more interactive. You press this button and you hear the stories of Obayawari first. They press that story, this button, they hear the stories about, you know, they wear headphones, they can automatically wirelessly connect with stories of displays all around the museum. You also know that when we were all growing up in the traditional African society, the courtyard was our theater. The courtyard was the place for telling stories. The courtyard was the judgment for judging cases, for everything. And so this museum is, according to Sir David Ajayi's design, is taking the courtyard system, style of architecture, and using this as the main interactive spaces within the museum. So you're going to have spaces like this, where you can tell tales by the moonlight. Spaces like this, where you can give performances. Spaces like this, where you can do drama. Spaces where you can even have your wedding reception. So it's being conceptualized as a community center, not just a museum. That's why we call it a living museum. So it's not just going to be a building housing dead objects, so to speak. It's going to be a museum that brings these objects to life. So when you come and you look at how an altar was set up in those days for traditional worship, when you imagine that these objects, that these people designed to decorate the altars where they offer their prayers, these same objects today are regarded as excellent or very fine craftsmanship. So I should tell you that in those days, they did their best to bring their best for worship. So this should also tell us that today, whatever form of worship you are embarking on, the question is, are you bringing your best? Are you doing your best? You see? So it's a continuous interaction and a continuous education, you know? And then when you consider also that the EMOA Museum He's not just going to tell the stories of Benin, he's going to tell the stories of West Nigeria, West Africa. So, without leaving Benin, you can get to experience West Africa. You can get to experience Nigeria. And with time, we're going to have situations where we bring the works of Picasso and exhibit them against the works of Felix Dubon or Benosawe or Benewomu or Prisonopropaya. So, you have the whole world, or even my works. So you have the whole world coming to come and see Picasso in Benin. You can also, because, one thing you have to understand, part of the problem is that when we speak about the chronology of art development globally, Africa is excluded. So we are talking about the Renaissance. We are talking about modernism. You never hear the Renaissance that was happening in Africa. Because in the 14th century, when the Renaissance was happening in Europe, we were already carving ivory and producing masterpieces in Africa. So ideally, if you're talking about the development of art, the history of the development of art globally, you should say, by the 13th century, these ivories were produced, and Michelangelo painted this. In the 14th century, this bronze was produced, and Da Vinci painted this. When Picasso was doing this, Benosawe was doing this. So you cannot classify Africa as culture, primitive art, and then you say art is Western art, the chronology of Western art. It has to be inclusive. The story must be complete, so that anywhere you are in the world, whether you are black, you are yellow, you are blue, if you are reading art history, you see the place of Africa and the contribution of Africa to the development of art very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. The time has raced by. This has been a surprising but quite enjoyable discussion. Quite intense, a lot of knowledge, a lot of positions. I know we have to wrap up because we have the cocktails at 4. So I'm going to just take your closing remarks very, very quickly, half a minute. I'll start with you, Dr. Ṣọlá.
Well, closing remarks, thanks. Thanks.
Closing remarks. We have not been sleeping regarding stolen works of art. We have been long awake, and we are still awake. We continue to be awake, and we must have our things stolen from us. We must have them back and cherish them. Thank you very much for coming.
My closing remark is going to be like this, and I'm going to be on the other side of the board and say, what are you doing? Let me put it in a more kind way. And so what with restitution? What are you doing in the meantime? What are we putting in place before the museum is being built? I don't want to hear restitution being so politicized and all these conversations. So my closing remark will go thus, and it's long. Restitution, I want you all to go away from here looking at restitution as a way of looking inward, being empowered. Those objects were created by our forefathers. What have you sat at home to bring up? What's your creativity being used for? Each one of us has a creativity, and we can only get there and get rich by cultivating each person's creativity. No one is made useless. So in the meantime, before this artwork comes, because this artwork tells me about a generation of technologists, a generation of architects, a generation of designers, a generation of chemical industrialists, because they knew they didn't need to just melt, just steel or iron. They knew they needed to put a bit of zinc here, a bit of copper there, it will shine more. They were smart. They make me proud to be African. They make me proud to be called Oluwatoyin. And they make me proud to be of a black color and black race. And know that even when the artifacts come back, they become a challenge to you and me. What are we recreating? What are we putting on the table? What jobs are we making? What object of virtues are we producing to say to our forefathers, we're here still running? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like in my closing remarks to say that we all should be hopeful, and we should be assured that we're working very hard. The Edo State government, the Palace of Benin, the NCMM, and other very important stakeholders under the umbrella of the Legacy Restoration Trust are working very hard to build the Museum of West African Arts. This museum is going to be a museum for objects, it's going to be a space for performance, it's going to be a space for archives, very rich archives, it's going to be an institution for research, it's going to be a space for social community interaction and development. So it's important that we all collaborate. We are collaborating with international and local partners, and as you know, for any project to be successful, people who live in that area have to own it, and that is why this event is very important. It's very commendable. Thank the Institute, the French government for this very laudable effort. Also looking forward to other opportunities that will be organized by us, where we can spread this knowledge and this discussion so that more people can come to terms with the reality of the importance of the soft power of culture. The fact that a learning man is a living man, and these objects represent our culture, our heritage, our knowledge systems, and they keep giving. So, like Oluwatoyin has said, what are we learning from this, and what are we doing with it? So once again, I would like to say on behalf of the people of Benin Kingdom, thank you very much for this opportunity, and we look forward to more. Thank you.
Enotie, my panelists, thank you very much for a lovely discussion, and I want to hand over to Vincent to close.
Well, I don't know if you heard, I'm a trained historian here, and actually today you heard what it means for me to be a historian. You know, that's exactly why I'm doing this job, so thank you. I'd like to thank our four panelists, thank you, and also my moderator, who really thank you for, for all these fascinating questions. I think, I learned a lot obviously, and I think we can think a lot about the value ascribed to what we're doing together, the value to these artifacts, and what the next debates we can have and next steps. I will just finish by thanking Giles again for this period of moderation, thanking the French Embassy, for this event, and also thanking Montpellier University for allowing us to be in this room. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'd like to invite you to go for a cocktail, please. Forgetting just the best part of the round table. Please, I'd like to invite you all, the panelists, everyone was here. Thank you to go there, please. Thank you.